11:30. I declare the meeting open, and could you all please stand. Acknowledgement of country. I would like to show my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of our elders past and present on which this meeting takes place.
We thank you, Lord, for the honour of being called by our fellow citizens to this office of honour and trust. Give us grace, diligently and honourably, free from private interest or prejudice, to discharge the duties entrusted to us, to the common good, and in your sight, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. This is the meeting 4439 being held on the 28th of May 2018. Attendance and apologies. We have one apology from the Mayor, Councillor Mark Bennett, who is not here. Otherwise, everybody else is here this evening. I think it's appropriate that we move forward 8.1 to deal with that apology. Everybody's agreed to that. That's been passed. So in terms of 8.1, we need a mover of the...
Seconded.
Councillor Miles and Councillor McLaughlin. I put that motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Sorry. Yeah. As this is the second evening of our webcasting, I've had some feedback in relation to people's perception of how that meeting went. One key issue that was raised with me was making sure that people understood the votes, how council determined the vote. In the past, we've been pretty quick in the way that we've did our voting, but I think because people are finding it difficult to work out what the vote of council was, we might just take an extra couple of seconds to make sure that we declare the vote in whichever way it goes. Are there any other feedback that people might have had? I know some councillors might have got a few likes and things, but there are people out there watching. Yes, Councillor McLaughlin.
There was an audio issue, I think, with the last one. I think they could pick up the audio on either end of the chamber table, but perhaps not when Councillor Fitzroy and myself are speaking. We seem to be cutting them out.
Has there been a solution to that, Mr. Sanders?
Yes.
Could you just explain how we've solved that?
Okay. I set up a noise gate, a certain amount of noise that it would cut out after if there's a certain amount of silence, I'm going to remove that and should smooth out the audio.
Yes, Councillor McLaughlin.
Secondly, I think there was an issue with rustling of papers as well. It seemed to be very loud on the audio. I'm not sure if that can be solved, or we can just
not if you take out the noise gate.
I'll have to remix it a little bit.
Okay. Well, it's a learning curve for us all,
Yes.
and I think the first opportunity to do that was successful, and we'll refine it as we go along and get further feedback as we go along. And I remind councillors and the gallery that this meeting is recorded. It is webcast through Facebook, and so just be aware of that. There's signage around the room that explains in more detail. I won't go through that. So we now move on to the next matter of business, which is declarations of interest. Anybody has any declarations? If there's no declarations, then we'll move on to mayoral minutes. Under confirmation of minutes. Is there a mover? Councillor Miles. Councillor Sanderson has seconded that motion. Any comments in relation to the minutes? Councillor Miles.
Mr Deputy Mayor, through you, the question without notice that I put about the footpath in Henley, my understanding from the meeting of the day was that we had made that commitment to fund and build in this year's construction a footpath budget, that section of footpath. Can we clarify whether we made that commitment or not? I know that the answer that came back was that we couldn't fund it in this financial year, But could I just check if that was in fact a commitment that we gave, an undertaking we gave by vote of council at that meeting? Because my recollection was that we had committed to fund and construct in this year the footpath for that.
Yep, we'll
Mr.
check it out.
Yes.
Yep, we'll do it for you.
Just for completeness, Councillor Miles, which footpath, which street?
I just if I could take you to page 13. The footpath is on the southern end of William Street, on the corner of Sherwin and William. So there is an existing footpath on the other side of the road, on the what would be the southern side of the road. There's a footpath to a point, and then it finishes, and there's no footpath to go and connect to the rest of the footpath. So it's just it's a section of blank footpath that needs to be constructed, but it's just never been done. And inevitably people need to get to that point, cross the road if they want to continue, or they just walk across the grass. So it's a safety issue at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that explanation. That helps people viewing from their lounges. I might add the opportunity is also, I imagine the Mayor is watching from wherever he is in the world. He has the opportunity to check up on how we're going. So any other comments in relation to Councillor McLaughlin?
Yes, please, through you, Mr Deputy Mayor, to the GM. Thank you for my response to my question without notice regarding a curbside collection service. And I note that we are going to be heavily involved in the garage sale trail in October, which I think is fantastic. You've mentioned that we will be giving an additional complimentary household clean-up on the day after the garage sale trail to enable residents to get rid of things they haven't sold. Will that be an on-call service that they will have to register for, or is it something that will just happen automatically?
Just have to double check with that. I think yes, as part of their registration for the garage sale trail. But I'll double check that for you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That would be great.
Any further questions in relation to the minutes of the previous meeting? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. That item has been carried. We now move to mayoral minutes and reports. In the business paper, there's none, but I thought it appropriate that on behalf of the Mayor, I'll just give a verbal report on this very briefly. I attended yesterday the induction of the new pastor for the Hunters Hill Congregational Community Church, and I thought it might be appropriate for council to, through the Mayor, to write back to them and congratulate the new pastor and wish the congregation well in their new endeavours. Councillor Miles?
I'll move.
I'll second that.
Councillor McLaughlin. Put that motion. All those in favour? Against? That motion is carried. We now move to item 4.1 in our heritage and built environment. The first item is swimming pool exemption. 10A. Oh, yes, Councillor Sanderson.
Mr Deputy Mayor, I'd like to move an alternate motion. I was a bit disappointed with that report, but there are responsibilities. We're also going to provide reasons should we decide to decline it. What I'd like to move is that Council refuse the application made under Section 22 of the Swimming Pools Act 1992 for exemption of the swimming pool at 10A The Point Road, Woolwich, from provisions of that Act. Because, or I guess we should first of all ask for a seconder before I...
We should, yes. Is there a seconder?
I'm not really sure what the
Let's hear it.
Yes.
what would
Councillor Crassel.
is an alternative motion. Thank you.
Councillor Sanderson.
As I started to say, I was quite disappointed with that report. It failed to illuminate the fact that there is a part 4 of the regulations made under that Act, which sets out fees and so on. It also expands the reasons that arise in the Principal Act's Section 22(1)A, about what are reasonable exemption or reasonable reasons to exclude properties. The reason for that principal reason for exclusion is that is to provide basically disabled access for pool owners where the security fencing and so on would hamper their use of the pool. The other thing is I've got a reason set out here because the other thing that the regulation makes very clear that if we decline this application, we have to give reasons. So I've set out some reasons which I hope will help the staff, because I mean, for a fee of $70, it's a bit much for council to have to produce the sort of there's no money in it for us. We receive $70. If it's knocked back, well, I think it would cost hundreds of dollars to write the reasons as to why it has been knocked back. So if I could distribute the motion, that would assist. I should have done it earlier.
We'll just take a moment to read that.
Yes, we will have to take a moment. It's well written.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Everybody had a chance to read it. Okay, so we have the motion, we've read it. Councillor Sanderson has spoke to the motion, or do you wish to continue?
Well, I guess there are a couple of things I could add. As I've set out in the reasons here, the report concluded that the swimming pool does have the capacity to be fully enclosed by a child restraint barrier in compliance with AS 1926 Part 1 2012. So it can't be claimed, which is the reason, or one of the reasons under Part A or 22(1)A of the Act. It can't be claimed that it's neither impractical or unreasonable to require the pool to be fully enclosed by a child restraint barrier. And as I explained earlier, the exemption that's referred to in the regulation is in fact one to accommodate people who may have disability and may wish to use a pool and not to hamper their access to it. The final thing was that the sandy beach, again, AS 1926 in relation to permanent bodies of water will only be considered if it's very clear, and we should have been given this in the original report, but it should only be considered as an effective barrier where a pool owner is able to provide evidence showing that the body of water is permanent and the water at the edge of the pool is not less than pool area is not less than 300 millimetres deep at any time. Well, quite clearly, when the tide goes down and exposes the sandy beach, it doesn't comply in that respect. So really, I don't believe we've got any alternative but to refuse the application. I don't think it's all that onerous. I mean, I think there are other means that it can be, that child protection can be, or child boundary can be, or barrier can be erected without undue hardship. And there are also quite a number of outstanding matters with this, that there are trees which will be climbing points near existing fences. There's an existing fence that's got to be modified in a way that's not climbable. I don't believe they're issues that council should have to deal with. I mean, that's up to the reporting officer, but I just don't think we should grant the exemption.
Is there any debate? Is there anybody wishing to speak against the motion? Councillor Miles.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Just to begin with, I assume that Councillor Sanderson prepared this motion prior to the meeting today at some time. He's obviously printed them off. I think that I would appreciate, and I think the other councillors would appreciate, when a colleague has a motion to put forward, that they either email it to us or pass it around at our briefing, and not produce it as we are considering a report. If there's something to be put, then it should be provided to us well before the meeting so that we can consider it as a body of colleagues. I think that putting motions like this in front of us while the meeting is occurring, it distracts from the meeting itself. We have to spend time reading it. This has obviously been prepared and printed sometime before this evening, and should have been provided to us quite a while ago. I'm not going to consider this motion because I haven't had time to digest what's in it. This should have been produced and given to us hours ago, if not on the weekend or whenever, but certainly not just dumped on the desk tonight. And it's happened at previous meetings, and it's not good enough. We can't consider things on the run like this. I will speak against the motion. It's obvious that the body of water that is adjacent to the pool, the sea, is a permanent body of water. I think that the report that the officers have put forward has gone to why these exemptions are granted. In this case, it is because you don't want a large barrier that's seen from the water disrupting the views from Hunters Hill from the water. It's quite simple. I don't think that any child is at danger at high or low tide on a small patch of sand from crawling up and over a wall into a pool in the manner in which I'm assuming this motion is suggesting will happen, but I don't know. I haven't had time to digest what's in here. Again, I'd appreciate a bit of prior warning when it comes to motions being put to council. I don't think that there's no reason why this shouldn't have been sent to us prior to tonight. It's something, it is a professional courtesy as far as I'm concerned. To go back to the pool exemption, I would like to foreshadow that I'll be moving, in the presumption that this is not a successful motion, I'll be moving the motion as is read in the business paper, and I'll foreshadow that motion without it being put. But again, I have no problem with the recommendation that the council staff have obviously put to us, and I don't see an issue.
In relation to those comments, Councillor Miles, councillors are entitled to table motions, to modify motions during the meeting, and Councillor Sanderson is legitimate in what he's done. So your point is noted, but it is a legitimate and a reasonable motion, and it's on the table. Council can take its time to consider that motion as it would any amendment.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm not suggesting that he can't do it. I'm suggesting that as a matter of professional courtesy, he probably shouldn't do it, because it's happened at meetings prior to tonight, and it's a distraction. And it should be, just as a matter of professional courtesy, it should be sent around to his council colleagues prior to, in my opinion.
Well, that's your
in my
opinion, and that's up to the individual councillor to make that determination as to how they wish to present motions. So, as you point out, it's a way of presenting motions that is legitimate, and it's up to the individual as to how they receive that. I wouldn't let that issue detract from the meaning and intent of a motion that's tabled by a councillor. Councillor McLaughlin, you were looking, so you wish to.
Well, I do. I would like to make a few comments in relation to what Councillor Miles has raised, because I've raised similar issues with the Mayor. It is a professional courtesy too, and we did this under the previous council. If we had a motion or a completely different motion that we wanted to bring to council on a matter, then we would either email it beforehand around to all the councillors so they had a chance to consider the body of the motion. They weren't going to make any assumptions. They were just it was a professional courtesy so that they were able to have a look at it before they came into the council chamber. Sometimes that was actually done prior to the meeting in the briefing. There was no discussion on the motion. It was just presented beforehand. We had a chance to digest it and think about it before we came into the council meeting. I agree. I'm a bit confused by all the exemptions and the reasoning and the background. I don't feel comfortable with it because this has been prepared by Councillor Sanderson. The reasons haven't been prepared by an officer or checked by an officer either. So I'm not comfortable with this report. I think Councillor Sanderson's motions that he brings to council would be more successful if he did give them to us beforehand, because we don't have a chance to really get into the detail of them and understand the detail of them, because sometimes they're very complex motions, Councillor Sanderson. And you will agree with that. Sometimes your motions are 4 pages long. So I would prefer, and the other issue is that often we're finding that these motions are being deferred.
Councillor McLaughlin, you've made your point. You should be speaking to the issue on the table, not about your preference.
You asked me to make
yeah, you've had a chance, and,
okay.
and that's your, along with Councillor Miles, your personal perception or view, and that's noted. Now let's get on with the business before us as to this is a legitimate motion before us that needs to be considered.
Okay.
And we take the time to consider that motion.
Okay, I thank you. I take your point. I can't consider this motion because I haven't had enough chance to have a good look at it, and I would like to perhaps get, maybe perhaps through you, Deputy Mayor, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the thoughts of the Acting Works and Services Manager on whether these reasonings are going to be sufficient if we do decide to refuse the application. Is there anything you can add to this?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. Like yourself, I've just read it. It's an opinion with regard to that the opinion states it's impractical and unreasonable. In the report of the officer, it states that it's the reasoning why, and that the three-part test with regard to the risk and the analysis, and also the exemption why it's been taken on board with regard to the recommendation. So the report by the officer highlights in detail the reasoning why and the tests associated with risk. The motion at first blush is basically an opinion, unknown, the reasoning for it, impractical, unreasonable. That's all I could add, unfortunately.
And sorry, one more question if I could, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to the planning. There are a number of pools, in fact, quite a number of pools on foreshore areas that have no fencing whatsoever. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the reasoning, I think Councillor Miles picked that up, is basically it's the character and when viewed from the water to ensure that it doesn't impede, and there's a state policy with regard to that, and also LEP and DCP minimise that where it's possible, not to have any barrage or fencing along the waterfront to ensure that we see the seawalls and the landscaping and the trees. That's the intent.
Could I have one more question, please?
You certainly may. Let's explore the issue fully and
Thank you.
so that we can understand what the issues are.
In your opinion, are you satisfied with the exemption?
Most definitely, I stand by the report. We would have put it up if we weren't satisfied with it, and we have looked at it in detail. There's only a small portion of that pool area that won't technically comply, and then, like you said, there's other places in the municipality that have larger areas. Mind you, pools, and you saw the amount of clauses in there that we have to consider. One of our staff members is proficient with regard to that training, with regard to pool and pool fencing, and to today's requirements. So I'm very comfortable with the report.
I have a question, if I may. There's an issue I raised at the last meeting when I was a councillor, is the very obvious issue, and it's something that's covered in this motion, is that it does not comply in terms of the body of water which it faces. It is a tidal body
That's
of
right.
water,
That's what the
and you
exception.
cannot, and to me, I was wondering how council can waiver that obvious and very deliberate clause. If there's a chance of a child getting through
Sure.
there, what is the council's logic?
Well, it's the body of water and the depth of the water, and also when the water the water goes in and high tide, low tide, the height of that retaining wall ranges from 1.1 to 1.7 in height, and we feel that that is a physical barrier as well.
But does it comply with the 1.8?
It needs 1.1 or 1.2.
That's the point of the exemption.
Anyway, yes, councillor Collins.
That's the point of the exemption.
Okay, it looks like Councillor Sanderson's motions just got down just to the legal part of it. And it seems that they're addressed here on page 3, is it impractical or unreasonable, which the council officer said it's neither of those. So then it comes down to, and I'm probably reading from both motions here, but just to save time, the report we've got here, are there alternative provisions to restrict access no less effective than those prescribed? And it seems from Councillor Sanders' motion is that test has to be met in order for us to grant the exemption. Now the response to that doesn't actually say it is, it's no less effective. So I'm just wondering whether we can even grant this or not. Because it doesn't say that the alternative option is as effective as a complying fence. So can we even grant this, even if we wanted to?
Through you, Deputy, yes, you can.
How? Is Councillor Sanderson's interpretation of the law here incorrect? There's 3 tests, 2 we've agreed that are off the table, so it comes down to no less effective.
Well, like I said, on page 3, point number 2, exemption area of the swimming pool will be restricted with exemption of the low tide. So when the low tide goes out, the restrictions will be there. When the water comes in, that's where it doesn't comply. So we're saying.
So when it comes in, it's not
body of water. Yeah, that's right. So it's a moving feast basically.
So sometimes it's as effective, but sometimes it's not.
That's right. And we're saying that we're happy to, with all the other restrictions and barriers that they're going to put up with the proposal, we're comfortable with it.
Councillor Cresswell.
I have faith in the team that have put together the report. So it's really just a question to clarify. From the picture that I can see, if a child on either an adjoining property or another adjoining property can get down into the Lane Cove River and scamper along the foreshore and either turn left or right and hit a wall, they'll turn the other way and walk a few paces and hit deep water. So I'm just, should we put a fence in the river to stop children from running along the river? Like at some point, I have full faith that the officer who went to the site, looked at the site, spoke to the owners and made the suggestions they've made, has done it with the safety of our children in mind and our presentation from the water. If they had any inkling that a child could get into the river and not choose to drown in the river, would prefer to climb a wall and get into someone's swimming pool, if they thought for a minute that that could happen, then I'm sure they wouldn't have recommended the exemption. And I have faith in that. So am I right in saying this is a child who's already in a river, not being able to get up a wall is why we want to put a fence there? I just am wondering if I...
hit the nail on the head.
Okay, just check. Thank you.
Any further questions before we enter into debate? If there's none, does anybody wish to speak against the motion? No. We've had questions, we haven't had discussion, except there's a foreshadowed motion by Councillor Miles. Are there any further councillors wish to speak for or against the motion?
The alternate motion?
No, there's no alternate motion on the table. The motion on the table is the one presented by Councillor Sanderson. If not, Councillor Sanderson, right reply.
Firstly, I apologise to councillors for the lateness of this motion. Reason being, I was drafting things at about 5 to 6, and this one, I started to look at it and I didn't pick up the fact that the regulation wasn't in the report until relatively late this afternoon. So I apologise for the time it's taken me to get it to you, and but it's out of concern that it would seem to me that as the law stands, we cannot grant the exemption. But I'll leave it at that, and let's vote on the matter.
That closes debate. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare it lost. Now, Councillor Miles, you had a foreshadowed motion. Would you like to present that?
Yes, Mr Deputy Mayor, I will foreshadow the motion as it appears in the report. Let me find my...
Page 5.
As it appears in the report, I'm happy with it.
Is there a seconder to Councillor Miles' motion? Councillor Crassley. Councillor Miles, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Just to perhaps commend Councillor Crassley on the most poignant thing I've heard in this chamber in a long time, that if you're already in a river, why would you want to get into a pool?
Wash the salt off.
Wash the salt off, I guess, unless it's a salt pool. No, I have no problem with this motion going through. I have full faith that the staff would have been very cognizant of the fact that this is a child safety issue. The fact is that the reason that these exemptions exist in the legislation is for situations like this. I think it's particularly important, and this is something that Hunters Hill particularly prides itself on, that we maintain the character of our foreshore and how Hunters Hill is viewed from the foreshore. As Councillor McLaughlin has pointed out, we have many pools in Hunters Hill that are abutting the river on one side and the sea on the other. This is not to detract from the safety element, but it's important that we maintain our standards when it comes to how Hunters Hill is viewed from the shore, or from the sea to the shore. And equally, the code exists for a very good reason, child safety, but I don't think in this case that this exemption is overreaching. I think that it is fully appropriate. And again, I'd say that I have faith enough in the staff that they would have been cognizant of that when they wrote this report and inspected the site.
Are there any speakers against the motion?
Well, look, I'll just briefly.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Acting Mayor. I still am not convinced that we can even grant this. I think we can go through all different hypotheticals about whether it's safer for a child to wander into the ocean where they can walk in, or go in a pool where they dive straight in. And can't get out. It's beyond us to actually have that conversation. But the point is, if the alternative provision is no less effective, then I'm happy to go for it. But that's yet to be proven to me, so I can't support it.
Any further speakers for the motion? Right of reply, Councillor Miles.
Waive, Mr Deputy Mayor.
I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. So we now move to item 4.2. And before we deal with this matter, I would like to ask Mr. Karupis to reiterate what his discussion was, or his comments were in the briefing which Council had prior to this meeting. I think it's important that the community understands the rationale behind the report. So, Mr. Karupis, could you fill us in on the detail that you gave to the Council?
Thank you very much. Through you, Deputy Mayor. The report provides an analysis with regard to a comparison of proposed dual occupancies, manor homes and villa homes in accordance with our LEP and DCP. What you'll see, the concerns or the differences in controls are a number of stories, which we have the 2-storey control and there's a 3-storey proposal through the code. The car parking proposed for 1 under the code. We have more than that. We range from 2 and up. We have another issue we raised there is the lot sizes. The lot sizes could be further reduced, possibly down to 200, having regard to the new introduction of a subdivision, Torrens type of subdivision, where this proposal, where we currently have strata, which does not provide a line on the ground. It basically provides some sort of separation. However, the proposal through the code is creating a Torrens style, which again disrupts our subdivision pattern. The other issues are loss of trees, height of the trees that need to be a height of 8 metres could be taken away. Our controls are 4 metres. So basically, if you have on the site, you have a number of trees less than 8 metres, you can take them away, lose the tree canopy, and then under the code it says you'd have to provide 2, one in the front and 1 in the back only. Also, there's a landscaping site coverage constraints that really are lesser than our controls. So they're just in a nutshell as far as the comparisons, and what our concerns are basically reiterating the 3-storey appearance of the code compared to our 2-storey appearance in our residential zones. A significant departure from Council's existing subdivision pattern. The code landscaping area requirements are lesser than Council's, one by the loss of trees and also the site coverage component. Yes, and that undermines basically our sound strategic planning approach that we've maintained through the community for many years through our LEP and DCP. And also the other issue of certifiers and the governance with regard to how that comes about. And you've all heard that we have numerous and everyday concerns through certifiers with regard to who polices them, who has control of them, and what rights council has and officers to be involved with complaints of an everyday nature. The report also goes in detail with regard to every portion of those concerns underlined on page 19 and highlights the issues. And we talked about landscaping, and landscaping tree canopy of Hunters Hill is most important, where the state government has announced an increase of 380,000 odd trees by 2030. That's our concern, which will diminish the tree canopy in Hunters Hill. The other issues on page 21 of the report highlights the dual occupancies will potentially have an issue on our streetscape, our local character, and will not provide the benefits to the department in seeking the terms of housing yields it recommends for council. So what we're saying, we're asking for an exemption to ensure that this is part of our residential strategy, and to fine-tune possibly the code that meets our right criteria and requirements to have minimal impact in our area, in our local government area. And we're not saying we don't want Dulux. We already have Dulux. We already have Dulux in our LEP. But we want to fine tune it, ensure that we don't lose the character. That's what we're saying. Also, one size does not fit all approach. That's on page 22. And we go into the detail with regard to every municipality has got their own different types of characters. Where the design guide with the code, it's really flat roof, bulky type sort of long length development, where we have articulation, colours, finished materials, landscaping, pitch type roofs with ease overhang that marries in with the character of our area. So we want to make sure that the infill development fits in with our current character of our areas. The other significant thing we highlight in the report on page 23 is basically we can address these issues as long as we're permitted to have, again, a time up our sleeve to get an exemption to put it part of our strategy, like most other councils are asking the same thing as well.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a very important issue for our council and our community to get our detailed understanding, and thank you for giving that summary of the report. In context, this is an issue that's been dealt with by our neighbouring councils, and is an issue across Sydney that has been raised with the government and the relevant minister. So with that context and with the explanation by Mr. Karufis, how does council wish to proceed?
I'd like to move the recommendation.
Councillor McLaughlin's moved, second by Councillor Crassoy. Councillor McLaughlin, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, I will speak to the motion. I'd like to start by commending the author of the report, Philippa Hayes, for her comprehensive and I think easily understandable analysis of the new housing codes. And I would encourage our residents to take a good look at this report as well if they have the opportunity. I'm assuming that it will form part of whatever we put on Council's website in relation to the new housing codes. Particularly the table, I think, which gives the comparison between the code that is coming in and Hunters Hill's controls. So I would like that to be put on the website if possible. I do feel, as a councillor now, much more confident about understanding how these controls will impact on our municipality. And I think we can safely say that councils across Sydney in general are being given a very raw deal by the state government, who is really riding roughshod across our local planning controls in their ever-present push for development. And I agree that we need to express in our profoundest terms our displeasure with the changes that are coming in, and that we need to, we're quite lucky that we have the conservation areas, the riverfront areas, the waterfront areas, and their heritage items. But I do worry for all of our other zones. And I think it's critical that we get a blanket exemption for the entirety of the Hunters Hill municipality. We have our local member as our planning minister. We really need to make sure that we express in the profoundest terms our need to get a blanket exemption for Hunters Hill.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. I'll bring Council's attention to point 3 in the recommendation, which I think covers your request in terms of having it on Council's webpage. So
thank you.
I think that's covered. Are there any speakers against the motion? Councillor Sanderson.
I don't wish to speak against the motion, but I'd like to suggest an amendment.
Wish to move an amendment? Yes.
I just believe we should strengthen the motion up a little bit. I think the best result with this legislation would be to have it completely repealed. At the end of the day, yes, it impacts on us, and it's all very well to say we are partially protected.
Councillor Sanderson, what are the changes?
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Again, apologies. This was being drafted at about 5 to 6, but it's purely to strengthen the motion up. There is nothing there to in any way derogate. I
Thank you.
Councillor.
Councillor, that's one. Thank you. We'll take a moment just to have a read of this. I assume the red typeface is the changes you're proposing?
That's correct, Mr Deputy Mayor.
Could I just ask one question?
Yes, Councillor.
Just for you, Deputy Mayor, to Councillor Sanderson. Is this similar to the last week's motion?
Councillor Sanderson?
It's very similar to last week's. After the discussion we had the last meeting, I took note of what parts of the motion other councillors were not comfortable with, and I apologise. This was the piece of work that I was working on at 6:30. So those pieces have been removed and it's been blended in with the other motion. I think all elements of the officer's motion remain.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, Councillor Sanderson, if you could not necessarily read it out, but there are people potentially watching this through our webcast that won't have a clue about what is being proposed here. Could you just quickly summarise what additions you've added?
Okay, at part two I've more fully described the legislation, because what we go on a little bit further in this motion to say that the preferable result would be for the legislation to be completely repealed. So at point three, I've expanded it out to say that the submission also requests a delay in the implementation of the low-rise medium density housing code across New South Wales, which is basically the same terms in the original motion. B, that the state environmental planning policy exempted and compliant development code amendment low-rise medium density housing, which is the full title of the instrument, which amends the SEP exempt and compliant development codes to include low-rise medium density housing code, be repealed before its commencement. And then C, failing repeal of provisions enabling the low-rise medium density housing code, that on an ongoing basis the municipality of Hunters Hill be exempted from the provisions of this code, and that our local planning controls prevail over state policy. Then there's a couple of other. Point 4 is exactly the same as the point in the original motion. Point 5, the General Manager seek an urgent meeting with the Honourable Anthony Roberts to be attended by the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and appropriate council officers to pursue the requests to be made at the points above. And 6, that council will be kept up to date about developments relating to this matter. That 7, that council engage with surrounding councils, NESROC, local government New South Wales, to develop strategies to minimise the impact of the low-rise medium housing code.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. I think that assists anybody that's watching understand the changes. And from what I can read here, these are similar to the points that you raised at the previous meeting.
Very much so.
Yeah. So it's not new to council. So we have a motion before us at the moment, and we have amendments. Is there a seconder to the amendments? Have you had enough time to read the amendments?
I'm happy to second.
Councillor
the
McLaughlin has
amendments.
seconded the amendments. Do you wish to speak to your motion, your amendment, Councillor Sanderson?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I, like Councillor McLaughlin, would like to commend Philippa Hayes, who put this really excellent report together. I'm pleased that we waited a fortnight just to get a better understanding of the code. It's one of those incredibly complicated things. My preference would be to see this legislation completely repealed, and that's why I put the extra points into this amendment. I don't know. Whatever we do with our LEP, we're still going to have problems in terms of if this code continues to exist, and if it ever applies to the municipality of Hunters Hill, we'll have issues with certifiers complying our development. And as I said at the meeting a fortnight ago, there are problems with that because of the difficulty of council controlling them and so on. Apart from that, I think basically it's the same as the motion. It's also got. I think the important thing to make sure that councillors continue to be informed about this, and that we engage with our neighbours over strategies to deal with this code. Should we ever have to, or should we have to deal with it?
Are there any speakers against the amendment to the motion?
Yes, Mr Deputy Mayor. I don't have any problem with the motion as put. I don't per se have a problem with certain components of the amendment, particularly points 5, 6 and 7. My concern is that I think that there's a general agreement around the table that Hunters Hill would like an exemption from the code, and that there is probably an undue impact for such a small municipality with a lower rate of development in having a uniform or blanket approach to as the code has provided. But I don't think that calling for the repeal of the code is sensible, because that's not to say that in other areas, in greenfields councils, this is not an appropriate code to be using. I think that, and I am all for seeking an exemption for the very practical reasons that the code shouldn't be being implemented in Hunters Hill in the way that it's outlined, particularly when it comes to manor houses, without us at least considering through an exemption for a period how we can tighten up our instrument to make sure that we don't have inconsistent character in our built form. But I think calling for the total repeal of the code as a state environmental planning policy is the wrong way to go about negotiating with the Department of Planning a good outcome for Hunters Hill. I think it would detract, because it biases your position from the get-go. So I'm happy with the motion as put, and with certain elements of the amendment. But I think that the motions calling particularly for the repeal of the SEP, the low outside of the exemption, is a mistake, because I think that it biases what in the end has to be a negotiation with the Department of Planning about why we need an exemption for the time being, and why it is that we feel that the code as it is written and as it is being implemented would be inconsistent with the character and values of our LEP and our DCP, which I think is a very fair argument to put. I don't think calling for its abolition where it may work in areas of South Sydney, Southwestern Sydney, Western Sydney, even far North Sydney, which may be the case, and those councils are similarly allowed to ask for their own exemptions if they don't feel that is the case. I think that it's the wrong way to go about what should be a dialogue with the department to seek this exemption very seriously, and to look at how we can tighten our LEP and DCP, but particularly the LEP, to make sure that we don't have inconsistent development in Hunters Hill with what has always been quite a stringent and character-based method of approving development applications.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Miles, can I ask a question? So your concern is about 3.B, is that?
My concern is 3.B, yep, 3
And C.
and C,
Oh, I see.
which is relating to B, but points 5, asking for a meeting with the with our local member and the Minister for Planning, with the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and appropriate council officers. I have no problem with that, seeking that meeting. Councillors be kept up to date with the developments relating to this matter, I think is very sensible. And council engage with surrounding councils, NESROC and local government New South Wales to develop strategies to minimise the impact of the low-rise medium density housing code. I don't see any problem with that. I think that we should be talking to those bodies and councils about the impacts of the housing code, and I think that that would inform us whether or not they are seeking exemptions, whether or not it is working in other places where they do have greenfields development. But the reality is Hunters Hill doesn't have a lot of developmentable space. It's not, we are a very old suburb, and we just don't have the infrastructure in terms of lottage to take a hell of a lot more density. It's not in our character. So I think that on those points I can't fail Councillor Sanderson, but it's just it's asking for a full uniform repeal that would probably bias our position in doing what we should be doing, which is asking for an exemption.
Mm-hmm. Okay, is anybody for the amendment? Against? Councillor Cresswell.
Also not against it, though I would suggest that, on points 6 and 7, I would have thought that if as a council we resolve to do something and entrust our council management to execute it, that we would be kept up to date about developments relating to it. And even in reading this report and discussing it earlier, I think it's clear that there already has been engagement with surrounding councils, and that would be how our management will be doing their job well. I would have thought that was a given. I think it just makes the motion large and clunky and wordy. Those last 2 points should just be part of the job that gets done when we resolve for the rest of the motion to happen. That's my thinking.
Yes. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Councillor Sanderson, would you like to reply? I do note that there is some concern about 3.B, and if that was to be effective, then the strikeouts in 2 would probably have to be retained. Councillor Sanderson, do you wish to speak in reply to your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. My approach on this is that the best result would be the complete repeal, and funnily enough I had a telephone call from Councillor Andrews Big of Lane Cove Council the other night, who's the endorsed Labor candidate for Lane Cove. He advised me that at that stage Lane Cove had received exemption for 12 months. He was not satisfied with that, and he said he'd been speaking with a shadow housing minister that there is strong prospects that if there were a change of government next year, that code would be repealed. So I think it's a better point to take. It also, by asking for that exemption, I think it gives people a greater understanding of the impact of how bad it is. And on that, I mean, I think wonderful that 75% or however many of our properties are protected as heritage conservation areas. That I'm not going to go into the numbers that are likely prospects, but it's not a strong position to be in if this can impact anyone in this municipality. We don't just protect, we've got to protect everyone from this. If the code survives, even if we do fix up the LEP, there is still some prospect of fix up, fine-tune the LEP. Even if with a fine-tuned LEP, there is still prospect of this code operating and overriding it. So I think the best solution would be repeal. And I mean, the report is quite damning, not just of the effect of the code in Hunters Hill, but also more broadly. So for that reason, I'd prefer to leave the prospect of seeing the legislation repealed. It makes a statement to an incoming government if it should change in March. The next best result would be an exemption for our municipality on an ongoing basis. If we can't achieve that, then, well, that'd be very disappointing. The other thing about it is I would really prefer that, to support all the other people that are going to be impacted by it. I think the best result would be a full repeal of the legislation.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. You wish your amendment to stand as originally proposed. I'll now put the amendment. All those in favour? Against? Declare it lost. We now move back to the original motion, which was moved by Councillor McLaughlin and Cresswell. So, Councillor McLaughlin, do you wish to speak to your motion?
I do wish to speak to the motion, but I would like, as this motion has been lost, I would like to propose that amendments be put into.
You're proposing an amendment to the motion?
I am, yes, thank you. That points 5, 6 and 7 of Councillor Sanderson's amendments be included in the motion.
Does the seconder of the motion, Councillor Cresswell, do you agree with that?
Yes.
If you do, then both the mover and the seconder, that becomes the motion.
Thank you. I have spoken on this already. I didn't support the amendment. I supported it for discussion, but I didn't support the amendment put by Councillor Sanderson because I did listen to the debate and I did find Councillor Miles's his statements about really the most important thing is getting an exemption at this point, and a repeal would be second. And I just felt that was the most important thing for this council at this point, and I do actually agree that parts of this code probably are suitable for greenfields areas. So I didn't support the amendment as put by Councillor Sanderson for that reason. So I will stand by my previous comments about the original motion and ask for those two amendments. Thank you.
I do note that the numbering will be now 4, 5 and 6 rather than 5, 6 and 7. That's just because there's the ordering of the numbers, so just so people are clear on the numbering. Are the speakers against the motion as amended? Because the amendment now becomes the motion.
I think the mover and seconder both agreed. So
yes, that's what
you're
it becomes the motion. Are there any further speakers? For or against? Right of reply?
No, thank you.
Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. We now move on to the next item, which is 7.1, which is the yellow line, which was discussed at the previous council meeting, and further information was requested to be brought forward to this meeting. Mr. General Manager, do you wish to highlight what the changes are to the report?
probably Mr. Curtis might help us out here. Mr. Curtis, I think from memory we've just added.
Because council did ask for further information, and I think it's important that we highlight where that additional information is.
So we added the...
Because my reading of it is very little difference to the previous.
There is very little difference.
Yes.
There's reference made to the Australian Road Rule 201428. There's some additional information suggesting that it would be a pilot in selected areas only. That wasn't in the previous report. Noting where we've had some discussions with some other councils, what they've done, and suggesting, I don't think that was in
The
the
other part
previous
was
one.
basically the concerns about painting the stone, heritage stone curbing. You'll see that's outside the lip of the curb of the gutters, so it's not intended to do that. The other part is it's not going to happen overnight. It will be a gradual, staged approach with regard to when we take old signs out. We'll put the line marking, so it'll be a long-term project rather than an overnight project. It's saving costs such as signs, when signs get bolted over or demolished or whatever. Replacing the signs, the costs associated. Painting is cheaper, obviously, so it's cost benefits of that as well. General Manager.
My understanding from the previous meeting was that there was issues around community consultation. It appears that we're going to be in item 2 in the recommendation that we're going to be educating the community rather than consulting with them.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why that issue was not taken on board?
There's two parts to that. One is the education, so everybody understands the rules about the yellow lines. There was discussion in relation to if there's going to be a yellow line outside a particular property, we need to either letterbox drop them or highlight that the sign's gone and the yellow will take place. So that's hand in glove with the education component. One is telling the whole community, the other part is telling the residents in that area.
But you're not giving any opportunity for the residents in that area to have a say or comment.
If I might,
Yes, Councillor McLaughlin.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm going to foreshadow an amendment along those lines
Yes.
to this motion.
Councillor Miles.
Just a question through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. This yellow line is not going to be a universally implemented arrangement through all councils.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
And that's something that's being pushed by state.
Yep.
Okay. And is there going to be any leniency given in let's say the 6 months that it is implemented, when signs are removed and the yellow lines put, for people that maybe missed out on the education campaign, or as the Deputy Mayor has said, have not been consulted? Would there be any? Is there any way, or should we at least be investigating giving some leniency to drivers that stop in the no stop sign?
It's the law.
It is the law.
It's the law.
But just to assist you, even though it's the law, when we put up new signage at a certain street, we do have a bit of a grace period to allow people to get familiar with the new changing of signage. So we do have a bit of a grace.
That's a nice way to put a grace period.
Grace period, a week or two, or sometimes they'll get not infringements. They'll get a notice.
A notice.
A notice. Yeah.
Because it will be confusing for a time.
We've recently done that in Mary Street.
I'm not opposed to this. It's just it's going to be a confusing transition.
When there's changing of traffic signage or changing of traffic signage or movement, we have to allow a bit of grace period, week or two. That's the standard protocols that the rangers or the infringement persons do. Because the question is, when you go to court, obviously, didn't know the sign was there. The sign was put up yesterday afternoon. Parked the car the next morning, and it's not fair. It's got to be fair and reasonable.
Can I ask a question based on Councillor Miles's comment? I'm not clear as to whether this is mandatory for council to do or whether it's an option for council to do. It's an option, is it, Mr. General Manager?
I believe at this point in time, Mr. Acting Mayor, it's optional.
Right.
At this point.
But it's what people would, it's the preferred position being, what shall we say, pushed, is that the right word? Promoted by the NRMA.
Councillor Sanderson, I was just wondering if I could ask a question of you in relation to the Public Transport and Traffic Advisory Committee. This issue was addressed at that meeting, was it? Could you explain where the issue was in relation to that committee?
there wasn't a great deal of discussion of that in the Public Transport and Traffic Committee. It was brought to the committee by the Manager Works and Services. I think that might be one area where I amended the minutes. It was, because I mean, I don't really think there was a strong desire from that committee for it to occur. It was just something that the Manager Works and Services was pursuing. I think that probably the more important thing would be the removal of signs per se, rather than just concentrating on the no stopping signs, because I think we're missing an opportunity. When I walk from my home to the council chambers, I walk past, I think, at least 5 posts that could be made redundant, and none of those are no stopping signs. So there's a much broader opportunity if that's genuinely what it's about. So if I can say so at this juncture, I mean, I did have a motion that I put forward at the last meeting, and I've thought of another amendment to that, just with some of the discussion there's been already, which might be a satisfactory motion to solve the whole problem.
Well,
And
Councillor
troubles I
Sanderson,
can do it by hand.
are you moving that?
Well, I think it'd be appropriate to move that. I mean, I deliberately didn't draft it.
Okay. Wait a second. I think I might have overlooked Councillor McLaughlin's call. Did you wish to move a motion?
I did have an amendment to the recommendation, yes.
Yeah. But do you
I'm
want
not-
to move the
I'm sure
recommendation?
aspects of, yes, I would like to move it, and then perhaps we can
Do you want to
share
amend?
Could I pass, if I can just, if Ben could pass that to you? Oh, sorry, Councillor Collins.
Councillor Sanderson, could you read out what you're proposing?
Just at the moment, Councillor McLaughlin has got the only copy, but I think I can recall what I've said. What I'd be proposing is to say,
Whatever's going down the table.
Can I
We
just
don't-
move my amendment first of all?
Okay, no, can you move your motion? We don't have a motion on the table at the moment, so if you wish to pursue the one that's written with an amendment to that, please do so.
Thank you.
Could you clarify what your motion is?
Well, I haven't prepared my motion in advance, but I have had some thoughts on it, and that is the first part of the recommendation that Council reads as is that Council agrees to the replacement of no stopping signs with yellow line road markings with implementation on selected, and here I would add in main roads and thoroughfares, and then put full stop. Point 2 of the motion would read that should yellow lines be contemplated for residential streets, residents be consulted as to their preferred option of either signage or lines. It is an option, I understand. Point 3 would then become that an education campaign be initiated through electronic media for 6 to 12 months, and a mayoral statement be placed in the local newspaper.
Thank you.
As it reads.
Second
Is there a
motion.
second to Councillor Miles? Councillor McLaughlin, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, I will speak to the motion. I personally do not like the visual clutter of street signs. I support the rollout of yellow lines along our main streets. In fact, I follow a yellow line all the way from River Road to Burns Bay Road to the overpass now. And I think for consistency, we should be implementing them around the overpass particularly, and along those areas of Ryde Road that have the no stopping areas. I don't think that the yellow line is going to impact on the sandstone guttering. All line markings are on bitumen, so I don't think that's an issue for the community. But I do agree that the rollout of yellow lines in residential streets, particularly narrow ones, should be at the discretion of those residents in that street as to what they would prefer. Personally, I think signs are an obstruction, more so than the yellow line. I also agree that with the point that Councillor Sanderson made previously, that we do need to do a general audit of signage throughout the municipality, but I think that's a separate matter. I think that's something that the Works and Services Department should consider. In fact, I think we did an audit
for the Gladesville area under the last council at the recommendation of Councillor Bennett, who also does not like the visual clutter of signage. So I absolutely agree that on a separate issue we should be doing an audit of signage in general, but I do support the introduction of yellow lines at this point.
Are there any speakers against the motion?
Not against. Can I just propose a couple of word amendment to?
You wish to propose an amendment? Yes. Councillor Crassoy.
Just that in what became point 3, and this is more procedural, I guess, that the education campaign be initiated through electronic media, mayoral statement, local newspaper, and on existing signage, which I think might help with what Mr. Crefus was talking about earlier about people parking there one day and not being able to park there the next. Mind you, what we're talking about removing here is no stopping signs, so I think that's important, perhaps if we highlight it on the signs. And the reason for that is because no stopping zones are there to save lives. And I don't think a couple of weeks' grace is actually adequate. If someone stops in a no stopping zone, they should be fined.
Do we have a seconder to the amendment?
I'm happy to accept the amendment if the mover is.
I'm happy to accept.
Okay, that now becomes the motion, or it's incorporated in the motion. We got the wording for that?
We do.
Yes, okay. Any further debate? Councillor Miles.
I'd just like to mirror the comments of Councillor McLaughlin, and I guess reiterate the point that I agree with the removal of the signs. I think that and I don't think we should be afraid to implement sort of large scale programs like this, but it is going to take a bit. I just feel in my bones that this is going to take a little bit of getting used to by the community. And I think that Councillor Crassoy's point about putting signage on the no stopping signs to make people aware that they will be being removed, but it is absolutely still a no stopping area, is quite a good one, because I think people assuming that no stopping areas are becoming places that they can park is going to be an issue for us for a while during the toothing period, until people get used to the yellow line, as Councillor McLaughlin said, that already traipses its way down Burns Bay Road. So I think that it's a good initiative, but it's going to take a little bit of toothing to get it sorted. So I think that we have to be conscious of that moving forward.
Is there any further speakers for or against? Councillor Sanderson. Are you speaking for or against?
I would like to be against the motion. I think if we leave out the opportunity to remove other signage, which we can do concurrently, I think it'll be probably more economical, because part of my strategy would have been to have community report unnecessary signage. I mean, you know, I can reel 5 off the top of my head now. I'm sure we don't really need to do an audit, but it's going to be expensive. We can just get the information in and do the whole lot in one hit. I agree that there has to be, well, my preference would be that they're limited to main roads, but there certainly has to be consultation, and we have to commence with main roads. But I think we're missing an opportunity if we don't do all unnecessary signage rather than just no stopping signs.
Are you foreshadowing a motion?
I have a motion ready to go if people would like to accept it.
Yeah, as a matter arising?
As a matter of license.
Right, we have a motion before us at the moment which doesn't include the matter arising, or the proposed motion as a matter arising. Do you wish any further discussion? If not, Councillor McLaughlin, do you wish to speak
No, thank
in
you.
reply? With that concluding, I now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. Councillor Sanderson, you have a matter arising.
Yes, Mr Deputy Mayor. Last week, last meeting when we went through these issues, I had and at that point in time, I think there was pretty strong opposition to the yellow lines generally, except Councillor Miles. And I have my concerns.
Could you put the proposed motion?
Well, the motion I would put is what I proposed last week when we cut the other motion back. And that was just my point 3 would become point 1. The council can concurrently gather information about redundant or erroneous signage, including by asking residents to report on such signage. That following the above measures, council commence. A is probably not necessary. The removal of no stopping signs where curbside yellow lines marking have already been installed. B, the removal of signage that is determined to be redundant. And C, the rectification of erroneous signage such as parking and bus zone signs where restrictions on adjacent signs do not match.
Yeah, as a matter arising, it needs to be independent of the motion that's already been agreed to, so we need to take out the reference to the no stopping sign.
As I suggested, so.
Okay. Is there a seconder to that motion?
Yes,
Councillor McLaughlin? Do you wish to speak to your motion, Councillor Sanderson?
I think I already have.
You already have, that's indeed. Any further discussion? Councillor Miles?
Could I just have the motion as put read back by the General Manager, please?
Yes, Mr.
I have
General-
absolutely no idea.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. We'll just take a moment to gather our thoughts here. Jim,
Councillor.
It's point 2, 3 and 4 except for 8. Is it point 2 as well?
It's point.
Yep.
No, just 3 becomes 1.
No, 2 becomes 1.
No, that's out.
2's not out.
To the council gather information on the erroneous signs, including reservation reports, such signage, and I can make that simple and here. That where unnecessary
Councillor Bennett, we already have
signs are identified. They are removed.
Okay, the General Manager has a solution which he'd like to read out to you that I think captures those views put by Councillor Sanderson. Mr. General Manager.
One would be that council gather information on redundant or erroneous signs, including requesting residents to report such signage, and 2, that where unnecessary or erroneous signage is identified, they are removed.
Councillor Sanderson, is that the intent of your motion?
Well, it's brief, that's fine, it still covers it.
Is that okay with?
No, actually, Councillor Cresswell has just pointed out to me that it does miss one element of the motion, that
Yes.
the rectification of erroneous. Yeah.
So they are removed or rectified.
Yes.
Removed or rectified, yep,
Yeah.
that's easy. Done.
Could you read out again, please, Mr.
Yep.
General Manager?
Council gather information on redundant or erroneous signs, including requesting residents to report such signage, and 2, that where unnecessary or erroneous signage is identified, they are removed or rectified.
You're happy with that as the mover, Councillor Sanderson?
Yes, I'm happy with that.
The seconder, Councillor McLaughlin, you happy with that? Do you wish to speak further to your motion, Councillor Sanderson?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Does anybody wish to speak for or against the motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. We now move on to 8.1, which we've already dealt with, leave of absence for the Mayor. And that takes us to 8.2, which is the summary of Council's investments as at the 30th of April.
I'll move, Mr Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Miles has moved the motion. Councillor Crassoy has seconded it. Is there any, do you wish to speak to your motion, Councillor?
No, I'll waive.
Is there any speakers for or against the motion?
Just a question.
Yes, Councillor Collins.
I think we were going to get a report on this, on what we were doing with these interest rates, or has it been decided that we're going to lock them in for longer? periods of time, or what's happening with that?
Mr. General Manager, would you like,
Did I can answer it or you can answer it? Well, we haven't had time to get a report done. It's as simple as that. We've been doing the budget,
Oh, that's
but
okay.
we will have a look at it.
Okay,
We
so
are going to have a look at it.
the next meeting?
I couldn't say that, but it'll be as soon as we can get it done.
is there any further discussion? If not, right of reply. Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare it unanimous. We now move on to 8.3, which is the draft community strategic plan, delivery program and operational plan. Councillor McLaughlin.
I'm not moving recommendation right now, but there's just an error in the recommendation I think we need to correct, and that is they refer to a next ordinary, in point 3, they refer to the next ordinary meeting.
Yeah,
That will be an extraordinary meeting.
that's correct.
Should just be to the extraordinary meeting.
Yes.
Just before we do that, I'd just like to let the community know that this is a major component of council's role in developing a community strategic plan, and council has been working very hard to pull that documentation together, and it has occupied a lot of council's time, both in terms of the strategic content as well as the budgetary issues. Council is not right at the end of that process at this point in time, and in addition to what is in the papers, the General Manager has advised a further program to ensure that Council has a chance to refine and conclude all the plans as well as the budgetary process. So there's still some more work to be done in this context, but what we're talking about this evening is whether or not we are able at this stage of development to place this plan on public exhibition. So is there a mover of a motion in relation to this matter? Councillor Moore?
I'll move the motion as put, that we put the CSP on public exhibition.
Is there a seconder to the motion? Councillor Pressley, is there any, do you wish to speak to your motion, Councillor?
I will,
Moore?
Mr Deputy Mayor. Just to say that, to reiterate your point, but also to say that the CSP is not, there's still some work to be done. I think putting it out to community consultation is a good what's a requirement, because this plan essentially outlines to the community what our strategic goals are for this term and moving forward, even beyond our current term as councillors. So it's quite important that members of the community go through this with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that the initiatives outlined by us as the council body are reflected, are a reflection of what they view our strategic objectives over the next term and beyond. And I think that there's a lot of good work been put into this document, but there's probably a little bit more work to be done during this consultation period, just refining some of the points that have been made, and I guess I welcome being a part of that process, but I think that there's just a little bit of honing to do still.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. I have a question to the General Manager in relation to the documentation I've had a look at. Some of the aspects of this in terms of its readability and some of the imagery in here, are they going to be refined before it goes out to the public on exhibition? Because there appears to be very fine print, a map that's not quite complete. There's a photograph of a Canadian woods rather than something that we would relate to. And I was just wondering, is there more work from the staff perspective before we put this out? And I would stress, being an older member of our community, the font size needs to increase dramatically to make it inclusive for everybody. So that further work, I think, would need to be done before it's made public. Councillor Miles, you moved the motion. Do you wish to speak further? No, you haven't.
I've spoken.
Yeah. Does anybody else wish to speak against the motion? Anybody else wish to speak for the motion? Councillor Prassel.
I would just like to commend the management team for supporting me as a new councillor and the whole council in understanding the importance of the strategic plan. It's been a privilege to see how much thought goes into our future decision making and planning on behalf of our community. I really want to commend what we have this far to the community and encourage people to read it and give us their feedback, because as Councillor Miles says, it's not over yet, and we really do need that feedback to help guide us even further.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? Councillor Sanderson wishes to speak for or against.
I just wanted to add a couple of cautionary notes. There are a few points where I think we have to get this right before the draft goes out. The primary one being that map, which has got a very obvious thing. It's the suburb of Huddersfield, not the municipality of Huddersfield.
If I could suggest,
Yes.
rather than trying to debate all this, if councillors have any editorial things that they would like, please let me have them ASAP and we'll fix them up. It's not a problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Right of reply, Councillor.
I'll waive, Mr Deputy Mayor.
Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. And I do thank councillors for their contribution and their diligence in this. And there are a series of meetings still to be held by councillors to further explore and respond to community advice about this, as well as working through some aspects of the budget. So I thank councillors for their contribution along with the staff, because it is one of our main tasks as a council, particularly a new council, and it's quite a enormous task to achieve in a very short period of time.
Yeah, the late item, which is 8.4.
All right, okay, so we want to push that in here.
We should do that in there.
Okay. No, that's not that one. I've got it under here. So we'll move to 8.4, which is a late item that was issued to councillors on Friday night. It is a very large document, and again, it is to deal with draft long-term financial planning for council 2018 and 2019 through to 2027-28. Again, this has been discussed by councillors, and there is a recommendation on page. Oh, where are we? Keep going.
10.
Yeah, page 10.
I'll move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Crassoy, Councillor McLaughlin moved the motion or the recommendation. Do you wish to speak to your motion? Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes, I will speak to the motion. I do want to thank again Council's Finance Department for the work they've done to ensure that our budget is predictable moving forward, and that we will hit a surplus in the coming period. What became apparent during the merger debacle is that our finances took a hit as a result of the state government freezing our rates and our rate variations. But what also became apparent was how our community supported us through the merger process. And I think we owe it to them to give them a budget that, and a community strategic plan, because these documents are all working in together, that balances fiscal responsibility with giving back to our community the services and the infrastructure that they deserve for having put their faith in us. And I think this long-term financial plan prioritises what we've heard the community wants. This the long-term financial plan underpins what is in the CSP. We have concentrated on vital infrastructure that we know our community wants. We've also focused on reviews and upgrades to our parks and our reserves, which I think the community has also asked. But most importantly as well, we've also focused on the technological issues that we know our community wants, which are things like our communication with residents and the ease of access to council services. And that's what we've prioritised here in the budget as well. And I would commend this to residents to have a good look at, see if they agree with it, and give us the feedback that they require on what we've said we would like to achieve for this council in this term and beyond.
Yes, I think it's very important that the community understand the complexity of the process we're going through, and that will be apparent in the plan that is put on exhibition in the executive summary. It's a fairly prescriptive process we go through as a council, developing that community plan, which is for 10 years, the council plan, which is for 4 years, the operational plans, which are a 1-year duration, which takes the vision down to action. And that's all overlaid on a resourcing strategy, which is assets, long-term financial planning, which we're talking about here, workforce management plan, and other plans associated with that. So all these plans are interrelated, and it's important that we make sure that they are well structured and well representative of the community's views and aspirations. So we have a mover for the recommendation. We have a motion on the table. Is there any further discussion in relation to this? Councillor Miles.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I do commend the staff on this draft. I think, again, it's a document that we're going to have to put a bit of work into before adoption. It's something that I believe we're having a workshop on in a week or two. I think there is an expectation in our community that we are managing our budget in a way that is sensible and community facing, and I think that we as council have discussed on several occasions where it is that we can place our community resources, and I think that I've discussed particularly when it comes to this resourcing strategy where we need to look at revenue of our assets and whether they are participating assets in front-facing community assets that are of value to our community, or whether they're underperforming assets. And that's something that I'd really like to hone down in this resourcing strategy is are council's assets providing the most that they can for this community, and where do we move forward in terms of the projections for council moving into surplus, and if we can get there, that's fantastic, but sustaining that surplus and sustaining our financial position so that we are fit for the future and that we are compliant with all those statutory obligations that we are obliged to adhere to as we are a creature of the state. If we do want to fend off amalgamations into the future, we need to make sure that we have a very solid position and that our finances are at the core of making sure that we are a sustainable organisation. And I think that this resourcing strategy is at the core of that discussion. And I'm just flagging that there are things that we need to look at in this term of council that I think most of us around this table will agree are very important for the long-term future of Hunters Hill, and it's going to start with this document here. So I'm looking forward to that briefing and the discussion of the other councillors. But this is a very critical document to what we're going to be doing in the next. Again, moving beyond our term, this is going to be a 10, 20-year plan for where we're moving, where we're putting our resources, whether or not those resources are the things that the community want us to be spending our money on, and where if we can spend those funds better.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Any further speakers against the motion? Any further speakers for the motion? Right of reply?
Oh, no, I'll waive that.
Okay. I now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? I declare that unanimous. That now deals with 8 point, or the late item. We now move on to 9.1, which we've dealt with.
No, that's true.
And we now go to 9.2, which my little there it is.
9.1.
So,
We, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we haven't dealt with item 9.1.
We did 8 points.
8.1.
oh, we did 8. Okay, yep. So 9.1 is a report on councillors' briefing.
I'll move.
workshop.
Second.
Councillor Miles and McLaughlin, is there any, do you wish to speak to your motion?
No, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Any speakers against the motion? Yes, Councillor Sanderson.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I think I'll reflect the views that you often express. This is a piece of paper that's got various headings, and I think there might be one relevant sentence. I'm sorry, I can't support that as being a proper report.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Is there any further debate on the issue? Councillor Cresswell.
I'd just like to speak for the motion. The point is that the information was provided to councillors on the possible impacts of new medium density housing code, and we were advised that details were to be sourced and reported to council on 28th of May, which is as it happened.
This is 9.1.
9.1 is what I'm
That is
looking at.
9.1.
Which is as it happened, and I found it very informative and helpful, and we did discuss it this evening. It was brought to council, and I don't see anything more is needed here. As to what went on in the briefing, no debate happened, no decisions were made. I think it's very concise and accurate. I support the motion.
Any further debate? Right of reply? No. Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. Oh, yes. Do you wish your name recorded?
If you would like yours recorded, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, as the chair, I agree with Councillor Sanderson that there's insufficient detail in the briefing notes. Item 9.2. There's a recommendation of the report be received and noted. Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Miles has seconded the motion. Is there any discussion?
No, I'm satisfied with the motion. Thank you.
Okay. I'll put the motion, Councillor Collins has now left the meeting. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. We now move to 9.3, which is the minutes of the Bushland Management Working Party held on the 21st of May 2018. Councillor Sanderson.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, this is an absolutely first-class report in terms of where it sticks to its, the remit of that particular committee. It's a little bit unfortunate they've strayed into local planning panels and also medium-density housing code, and there are a couple of errors in those areas that I think probably should be rectified. At two strategic planning
Councillor
updates.
Sanderson, are you speaking? Do we have a mover in a second?
No.
No. Okay, Councillor Sanderson, would you like to move the motion?
No, we didn't.
Before we can talk and debate, we need to have a motion on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move that the acceptance of the report be deferred
I'll second that, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
until such time as the corrections at item 2 strategic planning update, and also under the heading medium density housing code number 2 are rectified.
Councillor Miles has seconded that motion. I've got a question on page 90. It's proposed here to conduct the camp management plan in June, July, doing interviews with residents, etc. I feel that maybe council needs to reflect on the movement of those bats. They're not there in large numbers at this time of the year. is there a better timing for this? Is there a comment from the General Manager? I think we should be doing this work at a
That's
time
item
when
16.
the problem is at its peak rather than at its minimum.
Yeah, I guess there's a number of components to the plan. I'm not aware of them, but I'm aware that the bats migrate to the north in winter, so if it involves a count, then it wouldn't be terribly smart to be doing the count in June. But certainly if there are other consultation processes involved, which I'm assuming there are, there's no reason they shouldn't be able to go ahead. But we'll just, if the council wants to, perhaps Councillor Sanderson and Councillor Miles might include in their motion that the timing of the camp management plan in item 16 be reviewed.
I'm happy to accept that,
So,
Mr. General Manager.
Way to do it.
Happy to accept
Yeah, the mover and seconder has accepted that addition to the motion. Is there any further discussion in relation to the motion?
There is, Mr.
Councillor
Deputy
Miles.
Mayor.
Have we had a speaker to the motion? Are you happy?
I'm happy.
Yeah, you're happy. Okay, Councillor Miles.
I know a lot of questions were asked about this particular committee in the last council, and I still can't quite wrap my head around why, if this is not a committee of council, why it is reported on in council, and if it is a committee of council, why there's no councillors chairing or indeed involved in this committee. Why a bush care committee is straying into local planning laws and the GSV proposal, which seems bizarre to me. The plantings, I understand, Bedlam Bay, Biosecurity Act, Coastal Management Reforms, Conservation Act, but why they would be minuted as having talked about the medium density housing code in a bushland committee, and why they're talking about the LPPs and the Gladesville planning proposal is confusing to me, as this is either a committee of council and therefore should have councillor representative, or it is not a committee of council and therefore shouldn't be reported on in our business papers. We've never had clarified exactly whether or not this committee is under the auspice of Huntersville Council, whether it's not, and if it is not, then why it is reported on.
It has a working party status from what it says in its title. Mr. General Manager, would you clarify the role?
I can certainly do that for you, Mr. Acting Mayor. It is a working party. It's not a full committee. It can only make recommendations to council. It has a charter, and I will be reminding the officer, and I might even go to the next meeting and remind them what their charter is, and certainly their charter has absolutely nothing to do with anything in item 2.
Or, all of item 2, yeah, yes. I mean, there is nothing wrong with the rest of the report.
I mean, look, if they want to make some,
Passing
dare I
commentary.
say, if they asking for some information and the staff pass the information on, that's fine, but it's really not something that needs to be minuted in the meeting.
Just a point on that, it
yes,
does say
Councillor
business
Christian.
arising. So perhaps there was a question that, you know.
There may well
It
be.
might be clarified by looking at the minutes of their
Yeah,
previous
there may
meeting.
well be,
But business arising from those minutes might have been that one of the members asked how these things would affect local tree density or,
Possibly.
you know.
Possibly.
So it's just an answer to a question, business arising from the previous.
It may well be that.
Well, we need to have a closer look at it.
I think we'll have a look at it.
Councillor Miles, are you suggesting that if he's going to be reporting to council, that we
Well,
probably should make it available to councillors to
attend, and I don't think there'd be a problem
No, it's not.
with that at
You can.
all. It is just, this has been a very, this working party makes recommendations to council, not in the way that a committee does, and doesn't have the same participation by council in it. And it confuses when, as a bushland committee, they're talking about the Gladesville planning proposal, for example. With no rhyme nor reason. I have no problem with this being reported to council. I think that it's important that if there are bush care initiatives going on in Hunters Hill, that we are kept up to date. But at the same time, if this committee's being used as some political platform, or whether it's being used to drum up support or otherwise for the GSV development or whatever.
It appears
it's fact based
but
in the
as
report.
Councillor Sanderson has pointed out, some of the facts are not quite correct.
And that's fine. My point being that I think that the Bush Care Committee or the Bush Care Working Party should stick to Bush Care and perhaps not stray too far from that. It is a committee, it is a working party, and these reports, I take it, are intended to update council laws and council as to initiatives taking place in Kelly's Bush and Broken Park and River Lake Reserve and Bedlam Bay and other places, and more widely what is happening in bush care in the region, not to talk about the GSV development. That's my point.
And I agree. So we have a motion. Yes, Councillor McLaughlin.
Can I make some comments in relation to the report as well?
You certainly may. Yes.
I'm suggesting that this working party doesn't have any councillors on it, and that is fine. But if we have a report before us from the working party, would it be sensible to have the reporting officer present to answer questions in relation to the report when it comes before council?
No.
No?
No, Mr. Carepis will answer the question.
Okay, it's just that sometimes we have issues with this report, particularly with recommendations that come to us. And I'll point out the one on the feral cat issue, where it had to go back 3 times or 2 times for clarification. And it's issues like that that I think could best be answered by the reporting officer. But anyway, it's just a comment. If we don't, normally a councillor would speak to their report if there is an issue or a question in relation to it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just a.
I think we've had a bit of a discussion about this. Councillor Sanderson, you moved a motion. Could you clarify that motion for me, please?
The General Manager's got it recorded given the length of debate we've had on it.
Oh, I think I've got it.
Would you like to?
Well, yes,
I'll confirm.
Well, item 1, subject to the item that's meant to be deferred, subject to rectification of item 2 and its contents, and 2, the timing of the camp management plan be reviewed.
Do we want to put something in there in relation to a review of the way the community?
There might have been one point that you missed in the motion, and that was, we'll get back, it's such a long report. In business rising item 2, local planning panels, and under the heading medium density housing code, there was a rectification of error at point 2 under that heading.
I think it's probably easier just to have that removed from the.
I'd be happy for those to be removed.
Yeah.
Well, so we'll change rectification to removal.
As to its relevance to the matter. Will a staff member go to the next meeting to make sure that they interpret the council's comments adequately?
That's good.
Can I just have one last comment on that?
Yes, Councillor Prassel.
On speaking with Ms. Volmer a few months ago, I asked, because I didn't understand how the committee worked either, and she said all councillors are always welcome to attend.
Yes, you are, and it's published in the What's On, so you always know when the meetings are on.
All committees and working parties, councillors are able to attend but not necessarily participate unless they're delegated to. Okay, now we have a motion moved by Councillor Sanderson, seconded by Councillor Miles. The General Manager has read out that motion. Is there any further discussion in relation to that motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? I declare that carried unanimously. We now move on to item 9.4, which is the minutes of the Public Transport and Traffic Advisory Committee held on the 10th of April 2018. Is there a mover of the recommendation? Councillor Miles? Councillor Sanderson, you were the chair of the meeting. Councillor Sanderson, second. Any debate, discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare it unanimous. We now move on to item 9.5, which is the minutes of the Levesenay Friendship Committee held on the 2nd of May 2018. And Councillor Miles has moved the recommendation to receive and note. Is there a seconder to that? Councillor Sanderson has seconded the motion. Any discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Could I do that again because I didn't see all the hands? All those in favour? Against? I declare it unanimous. That now brings us to 12.1, which is meetings of various committees of council, and that's just providing dates and times for a range of councils, a range of meetings. Is there a mover and seconder to receive and note? Councillor Sanderson?
Could I just make one correction to it? I raised this at the last meeting. The time for Public Transport and Traffic Committee time is wrong. It should be 6 o'clock. It hasn't been changed as yet.
6 o'clock. Councillor Sanderson moved it, seconded by Councillor Miles. Is there any discussion apart from that correction? Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. We also have the what's on associated with that item, which helps keep councillors informed as to meetings and events coming up. We now move to a confidential item, which is requiring council's decision in relation to council and the committee of the whole. Is there a mover? Councillor Miles, Councillor Collins has seconded it. Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. I'd ask the gallery to leave, please. The doors to be locked and the video to be suspended. Okay, council is now resolved to move back into open council to report on the outcomes of the decisions made in the committee of the whole. Mr. General Manager, would you like to clarify?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. Advise that one matter was considered during committee of the whole closed session. It was a tender in relation to paving in Victoria Road, Gladesville, and council resolved to recommend that council accept the Civil Works New South Wales Proprietary Limited as the preferred tenderer and authorise the General Manager to execute a contract with Civil Works for paving and curbing the following sections of Victoria footpath along Victoria Road, as long as the total costing falls within the original tender price provided by Civil Works. Pitwater Road to Massey Street, Cow Street to Junction Street and Junction Street to Bonifant Road. The council agreed that 64,667 available under the Special Infrastructure Levy for repaving for the footpath from Massey Street to Cow be used for the current paving project. Council advised the unsuccessful tenderers of council's decision. The council pursue as a priority the repaving of the Victoria Road footpath between Massey and Cow Street and Bateman's Road and Hillcrest Avenue once the outcomes of the 3 current DAs for Victoria Road Gladesville are known, and 3, that the GM provide revised figures for clarity purposes.
Okay, do we need to vote on that?
Yeah, you do.
Yes, okay. We need a mover and a seconder for that motion.
I'll
Councillor
move.
Miles, Councillor Crassoy, is there any debate? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare it unanimous. That now concludes the main part of the meeting. We can move on to questions with or without notice. Are there any questions with or without
And
notice?
general business.
You would have general business.
Councillor Crassoy does, I believe.
Right, okay. Well, let's do general business
Yes, we
first.
can.
I just had a question about the, and consulted Councillor Miles on when to raise it, and general business was suggested. We very quickly skipped through the minutes of the Public Transport and Traffic Advisory Committee, also a really good report and set of minutes. But I noticed there are 2 sets of recommendations in here, and I just want to clarify the recommendation on page 96, which was made before our previous council meeting, where we resolved to consult the residents and consider a half street closure on Prince Edward Street in Gladesville. So I just wanted to clarify that the recommendation in this report, as we resolve to accept the report, is no longer relevant because of the previous decision of council.
That is correct.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Is that satisfied? General business?
Thank you.
Good, okay. Let's now move on to questions with or without notice. Are there any?
I'll table mine for the
Councillors wish to table?
for the benefit
Anybody
of-
wishes to read out for the benefit of the community that may be listening? Otherwise, they'll be reported on at the next council meeting in the minutes.
for the benefit of the community. I might not read mine out.
Okay, cool. Righto, well, if everybody could table their questions, that brings us to a conclusion of this meeting, 4439, 28th of May 2018. I declare the meeting closed and thank you for your attendance and participation. 44.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Well done.